Hey guys, tonight we're stepping inside the world of the Persian harem. You're about to find out why this life sounds like paradise, until you realise why it might also be the most beautiful prison in history. If you're enjoying our sleepy history dives, I'd really appreciate a quick like or even a subscribe. It helps more than you know. And I'm always curious where you're listening from, so drop a comment with your city and the time it is there. I love seeing our sleepy little global community connect. Now, settle in, dim the lights, maybe let a candle flicker nearby, and ease into tonight's journey. We're about to explore why you might not survive a single day living as a Persian concubine. You awake in chambers drenched with the scent of burning incense. The walls are tiled with intricate geometric mosaics, glazed in blues and golds. A eunuch, a guard whose loyalty lies with the palace alone, ensures that you never walk the corridors unsupervised. You're both celebrated and contained. The harem itself was more than a place of supposed pleasure. In reality, it was a sprawling, labyrinthine world, a city within the palace, often housing hundreds of women. Wives, concubines, servants, musicians, and attendants, all layered in a hierarchy so rigid it made medieval Europe's feudal system look casual. At the top, the official wife, or chief consort, wielding enormous influence. Beneath her, favoured concubines, sometimes foreign princesses traded like diplomatic gifts. Beneath them, the silent mass of women who might never see the ruler at all, yet spent their lives preparing as if they might. Historical records tell us that in the Achaemenid court, women could control immense estates and resources, especially those who bore royal sons. One inscription from Persepolis even shows women listed alongside men in receiving rations, an extraordinary glimpse into their significance. And yet, for every privileged line in a cuneiform tablet, there were hundreds of lives swallowed whole by obscurity. You're dressed in layers of imported fabrics, silks from China, cotton from India, and wool dyed with indigo and saffron. Your body is polished with oils, your hair scented with jasmine. Yet you can't choose who you see, where you go, or what you eat. Your meals are dictated by the palace kitchens, filled with meats spiced with cinnamon and cumin, sticky dates, flatbreads hot from the oven, and sherbet sweetened with honey. Delicious, and always controlled. At night, whispers drift through the tiled halls. The concubines trade stories of those who rose to power, and of those who vanished when politics turned cold. Because in this world, affection could bring you land, servants, and immortality in chronicles, but indifference could erase you entirely. Luxury or prison, it depends on the moment. You may be wrapped in furs while the rest of the empire shivers, or you may find that all the jewels in the treasury cannot buy you a single breath of freedom, and so your life as a Persian concubine becomes a paradox, a palace dripping with honeyed wine, music and fragrance, that also tastes of surveillance, suspicion and silence. You wake in a room that smells of roses and sandalwood, but beneath the perfume there is always the faint weight of smoke from the oil lamps that burn through the night. The walls are tiled in glazed turquoise and gold, a mosaic so dazzling it almost hurts to look at first thing in the morning. This is not your home, not in the sense that you ever chose it. This is a gilded holding chamber, and you are one of hundreds. The Persian harem was often imagined as a place of pleasure, but in reality it was more like a living archive of politics, power and paranoia. The word harem itself comes from the Arabic root haram, meaning forbidden. That was the point. The world outside the palace walls was forbidden to you. The men who were not eunuchs were forbidden from even seeing your face. The freedom to move through a city, to hear a marketplace, to even watch the sunrise beyond the palace courtyard was a luxury reserved for others. You might have gold coins stitched into your dress, but you could not walk outside and spend them. You lived inside a contradiction, and that contradiction defined your every waking hour. The harem of the Persian court was not small. In the height of the Safavid dynasty, there could be several hundred women inside, sometimes even 1,000 if one counts the wives, concubines, attendants, and servants. The structure resembled a city, a self-contained world within the palace walls, with its own gardens, kitchens and guards. Eunuchs were the keepers of these gates, men who were trusted precisely because they were thought to have no claim to fatherhood and therefore no threat to dynastic bloodlines. Some eunuchs, ironically, rose to great political power, serving as intermediaries between the harem and the court. Imagine the absurdity of that hierarchy. You, draped in silk with a caravan of camels, could not send a message to the outside world unless it passed through the lips of a eunuch. The mornings began not with freedom but with routine. The hierarchy of the harem was brutal in its precision. At the very top sat the queen or chief wife, often a woman of noble birth whose marriage was a political alliance. Beneath her were the favoured concubines, women whose beauty, intelligence or simple luck had drawn the attention of the ruler, and beneath them the countless others, many of whom might live their entire lives inside the harem without ever speaking directly to the ruler at all. It was less a romantic vision of selection, and more a bureaucratic lottery of survival. You're washed and dressed by attendants who are themselves caught in this web of hierarchy. The fabrics are imported, silks from China carried across the Silk Road, cottons from India, fine wool from Anatolia. These were luxuries beyond imagination for the common people of the empire, and yet here you wear them daily not because you chose them, but because they are assigned to you. Historical records from the Achaemenid period show that women in the royal household could receive rations of wine, grain, and even perfumes, listed meticulously on clay tablets found in Persepolis. These tablets reveal a level of organisation that makes the harem seem less like an exotic paradise and more like a heavily monitored warehouse of human lives. Meals were an exercise in both indulgence and control. The palace kitchens produced dishes that would shame even modern buffets. Lamb slow cooked with cinnamon and saffron, rice tinted yellow with turmeric, sweetmeats glazed with honey, sherbets chilled with snow hauled down from the mountains. But even in this abundance you had no choice. Food was not freedom. You ate what was prepared, and it was not yours to share or withhold. A concubine who tried to pass food secretly, whether as kindness or conspiracy, could be punished severely. Every date, every cup of wine, every sugared almond was another reminder that you were a guest in your own body. The air in the harem was heavy with scents. Incense burned constantly, meant to soothe, to cleanse, or to cover the less pleasant realities of confinement. Women bathed in rose water, their hair soaked in oils of jasmine and myrrh, their skin polished with pastes of almond and honey. These were not optional beauty rituals, they were obligations. The Persian obsession with fragrance and cleanliness was legendary. Foreign visitors often remarked that the Persians bathed more frequently than Europeans, and wore perfumes so strong that a ruler could be smelled before he was seen. In the harem, this meant that your body was not entirely your own. It was a canvas prepared for inspection, dressed, polished, and arranged in the hope that you might be noticed. Of course, the reality is that most were not noticed. The harem has been mythologized as a den of constant activity, but much of your life was defined by waiting. Waiting for selection, waiting for news, waiting for rumours that could change everything overnight. Gossip was the currency that circulated faster than gold. Who had risen in favour? Who had fallen? Who had been given gifts? Who had been dismissed? A glance from the ruler could transform a concubine into a landowner. A whisper of disfavour could erase her from the palace records entirely. The irony is that while you lived in the most luxurious building of the empire, your life could feel more monotonous than that of a shepherd watching the same flock day after day. What makes it even stranger is how powerful the harem was in shaping the empire itself. It was from these chambers that dynasties were born. A concubine who bore a son might suddenly wield more influence than half the empire's governors. There are records from the Safavid period where women of the harem directly influenced political decisions, arranging alliances, managing estates, even financing wars. You were both a prisoner and a potential queen-maker, a contradiction so sharp it could make your head spin. The grandeur was real, but so was the surveillance. and surveillance was constant. The harem was not a place of free conversation. Guards and eunuchs ensured that everything you did was monitored. Even the architecture was designed for control. Corridors twisted into dead ends. Windows faced inward to gardens instead of outward to the streets. Doors were guarded at all hours. The sound of laughter carried, but the sound of dissent was crushed quickly. There is a reason why travellers were often denied access to the harem. It was not to protect women's modesty, but to protect the fragile illusion that all was perfect behind those walls. As the day stretches on, you realise that being a Persian concubine is not a simple matter of luxury or misery. It is both. You're adorned in jewels, but those jewels weigh heavily. You're perfumed in roses, but the scent clings like a reminder that you are marked. You're surrounded by gardens of fountains and cypress trees, but the walls that enclose them are higher than you could ever climb. You're both inside the Empire's most opulent palace and outside of history's freedom at the same time. This is your daily rhythm now. Waking in silk, eating food richer than most people could imagine, watching the shifting currents of gossip and power swirl around you like incense smoke. The question that lingers is whether this is life or suspension. Whether you live in a paradise of luxury or in a prison decorated so beautifully that you almost forget the bars. And as the lamps are lit again in the evening, filling the halls with their smoky glow, the contradiction remains unresolved. You lie down once more on a bed carved from cedar, embroidered with gold thread, and you wonder which will weigh heavier in the end, the silks or the silence. The quiet of the evening is never true silence. Behind the perfume and the music there is always the whisper of rules. Rules shape everything here, written and unwritten, and they dictate what you can wear, where you can sit, even how you can breathe when someone higher in the hierarchy enters the room. Being a concubine means learning quickly that luxury has a manual, and breaking it comes with consequences that are rarely subtle. The Persian harem operated under a web of regulations designed to keep order among hundreds of women confined together. It may sound like a recipe for chaos, but in fact the strictness of the system prevented the palace from collapsing into scandal every other week. In the Safavid era, for example, records describe guards patrolling the outer walls at all times, while eunuchs watched the inner chambers. Entry without permission was punishable by execution, and even trusted servants risked their lives if caught wandering in the wrong place. It was easier to sneak into a royal treasury than into the private quarters of the concubines. That tells you how tightly sealed this world really was. You could not speak freely either. Speech was currency, and careless words could be as dangerous as weapons. Gossip was tolerated in small doses, since it was impossible to stop, but slander against a favoured woman or whispers of conspiracy could earn punishments that range from banishment within the palace to forced confinement in a smaller chamber, a luxury prison within a luxury prison. Historical accounts tell of women who were quietly removed from the harem and never heard from again. Some were sent to remote estates, others simply vanished from the records. Imagine the tension that created. Every word that left your lips carried the weight of survival. The hierarchy itself was a kind of law. The highest ranked women had privileges that trickled down like drops of honey from a jar. They had access to better rooms, finer clothes, and closer proximity to the ruler. The rest lived in smaller quarters, often sharing with several others, with fewer chances of being noticed. Persian society placed enormous value on hierarchy, and the harem mirrored the empire outside. It was a miniature kingdom with its own nobles, officials, and invisible borders. You did not cross them unless you had a taste for disaster. One of the strictest rules concerned movement. You could not simply wander the palace gardens at will. Specific times were allotted for bathing, for walking, even for sitting under a tree. Eunuchs supervised these outings, and their reports could make or break reputations. Too much laughter, too much display of confidence, even a glance interpreted as arrogance could be noted and passed along. The absurdity is almost comic. You might be surrounded by fountains and roses, but if you sat under the wrong cypress tree at the wrong hour, it could mark you as disobedient. Food was another area where rules pressed in. Yes, the palace kitchens offered delicacies, but access to them was controlled with precision. The chief consort and favoured concubines received the richest dishes. Others received simpler meals, often heavy with bread and stews. Sharing food outside of assigned portions was forbidden, not because anyone feared famine, but because sharing could create alliances, and alliances inside a harem were considered dangerous. If you handed another woman an extra fig, it might look like kindness, but in the paranoid lens of the palace, it looked like plotting. The rules extended to clothing as well. Bright colours, heavy embroidery and certain jewels were reserved for the highest ranked women. Wearing what you were not entitled to could be seen as an act of rebellion. Persian culture loved opulence, but it loved order even more. The irony is that most of the fabrics and gems came from the same stores, but who wore them mattered more than the objects themselves. Your body became a walking ledger of your rank. Your earrings a public announcement of your status. The rules dictated whether you glowed in silk or shuffled in cotton, and everyone around you noticed. Punishments were rarely written down in full detail, but travellers to the Persian courts hinted at their severity. Some spoke of women being whipped for insolence, others hinted at confinements that lasted months. In certain dynasties, women who broke serious rules could be drowned quietly in the palace pools, their names erased from records as if they had never lived. This may sound like rumour, but given the secrecy of the harem, silence itself was often the punishment. To vanish from the record was to vanish from history. In a world where even your survival depended on being remembered, that was the cruelest outcome of all. There was a paradox here too. The same system that trapped you also protected you. Outside the harem, women often had fewer rights, less access to wealth, and little chance of influencing politics. Inside, you were watched and restricted, but you were also cared for in ways most women of the empire could only dream of. Medical attendants visited the harem regularly. Persian physicians, following traditions inherited from Greek and Islamic medicine, prescribed diets, herbs, and tonics to keep the women healthy. You might be restricted, but you were rarely neglected. Even the rules served a purpose in maintaining the machine that kept the harem functioning like a city within the city. And yet, there was always the tension. Every concubine knew that the line between privilege and punishment was thin. You could be showered with gifts one month and stripped of status the next. Historical chronicles mention women who received estates, jewels and influence, only to lose it all when a ruler's favour shifted. Some managed to retire with wealth, living comfortably outside the palace walls in later years. Others became footnotes, their lives reduced to nothing more than a passing mention in dusty chronicles. The rules, harsh as they were, gave the harem stability, but they also made every step feel like walking a tightrope. When you think of prison, you imagine bars and chains, but here the prison was made of velvet ropes and embroidered curtains. When you think of luxury, you imagine choice, but here luxury was handed out like rations, controlled, measured, and withdrawn at will. The rules reminded you constantly that you were not free, no matter how soft the carpets beneath your feet were. As the night falls again, torches are lit along the tiled corridors, and the eunuchs pace their endless rounds. You hear footsteps echoing softly through the marble halls, a rhythm of authority that never truly sleeps. You curl into your bed of silks, aware that even in this stillness, the rules surround you like invisible walls. Tomorrow will bring another set of choices, another set of risks, another day where survival depends on following rules so carefully crafted that even paradise feels suffocating. The first sound you hear in the morning is not birdsong or the rush of city life. It is the clatter of trays and the faint splash of water being poured into basins. Grooming is not a choice here, it is a duty, and it begins before the sun has fully risen. Your body is not simply your own, it is part of the machinery of empire, polished daily to keep the illusion alive that the harem is a place of perfection. And so, you are ushered toward the endless rituals of beauty, an industry of skin and scent that would exhaust even the most dedicated of modern spa-goers. Persian culture was obsessed with fragrance and appearance, and the harem was its laboratory. Historical accounts describe rooms dedicated solely to the preparation of cosmetics and perfumes. Jars of kohl for the eyes, henna for the hair and nails, pastes made from crushed pearls and saffron for the skin. Even the Greeks wrote enviously of Persian love for perfumes, noting that their oils travelled in carved alabaster jars across trade routes that stretched from India to the Mediterranean. For you, these luxuries are poured, rubbed, brushed, and painted onto your body whether you desire them or not. The ritual begins with bathing. Pools of cool water, sometimes scented with rose petals, sometimes sprinkled with herbs like mint or thyme, serve as the first stage of transformation. You're scrubbed with cloths rough enough to peel away dead skin, then rinsed until your skin gleams. It may sound indulgent, and compared to the average Persian villager who might bathe only occasionally, it is. Yet indulgence becomes its own form of exhaustion when you have no say in it. Imagine being forced to take a luxurious bath every single day because the alternative is being labelled unclean, and therefore unworthy of notice. After the bath comes the perfume. Persian perfumers were masters of their craft, blending oils of jasmine, sandalwood, frankincense, musk, and ambergris. The last of these, by the way, was obtained from the intestines of whales, so while you smell like heaven, you're essentially wearing the digestive history of a sea monster. This little fact was well known even in antiquity, and yet people still paid fortunes for it. You're doused until the scent clings not only to your skin but to the air you breathe. Visitors to Persia often remark that nobles could be detected by smell long before they entered a room. For you, the result is less an aura of mystery and more a constant headache. The hair rituals are no less intense. Your locks are combed with oils to keep them shining, often scented with herbs and flowers. Henna is applied to give it a reddish tint, a practice that signalled beauty and vitality. Eyebrows are shaped with kohl, eyes painted to appear larger and darker, lips tinted with pigments made from crushed minerals or plants. Some concubines even had their teeth polished with mixtures of salt and herbs. The obsession with beauty was relentless. If you were chosen to be seen, you had to embody the ideal of Persian refinement. If you were not chosen, you still had to prepare every day as though today might be the day. And here lies the paradox again. These beauty rituals placed you among the most pampered women in the world. Outside the palace, a farmer's wife might go her entire life without access to saffron or sandalwood, much less wear them daily on her skin. Yet what they enjoyed as luxury, you endured as obligation. It was not an option to roll out of bed and decide that today you would skip the eyeliner. Neglect could mean punishment, or at the very least invisibility in a world where invisibility was already a threat. The cosmetic industry of Persia was vast, and many of its recipes survive in later medical and beauty texts. Mixtures of crushed almonds and honey were applied as skin softeners. Rosewater was considered a cure for almost everything, from headaches to melancholy, and was splashed liberally on both body and linens. Even gold dust was sometimes applied to the face, an extravagance that glittered under lamplight but could not have been comfortable. When you think of a master day, you imagine cucumber slices and quiet music. Here, your mask might literally be metallic. There is also the matter of hair removal. Persian beauty standards prized smooth skin, and concubines were expected to maintain it. Threading, sugaring, and pumice stones were all used, none of which were particularly gentle. Imagine lying on cushions embroidered with gold while someone uses a heated thread to pluck hair from your face. Luxury, yes, but luxury laced with pain. Historical evidence shows that these methods were common across the Middle East and South Asia, and Persia perfected them to an art. Pain was simply the price of refinement. While the rituals might seem absurd, they were deeply tied to politics. The ruler's image was projected through the appearance of his household. If the harem gleamed with beauty and fragrance, it suggested that the empire itself was flourishing. You were a display case, a living jewel in the treasury of statecraft. This is why eunuchs monitored grooming as much as they monitored behaviour. A woman who appeared unkempt reflected poorly on the palace itself. so even the act of combing your hair became a matter of empire. The strangest part of all is how little of this luxury you actually controlled. You did not choose your scents, your fabrics, or your cosmetics. They were assigned, prepared, and applied to you. You became the canvas on which Persian wealth painted its ideal. The irony is almost comedic. You live in the most perfumed place on earth, yet none of the perfumes are truly yours. You sparkle with powders that peasants would never dream of touching, yet you sparkle only because someone else decided you must. As the day draws on, the air grows heavy with overlapping scents. Musk competes with rose, sandalwood with myrrh, frankincense with ambergris. It is overwhelming, cloying, almost suffocating. In the confined chambers of the harem, where windows open only onto inner courtyards, the perfumes accumulate until the air itself feels sticky. Imagine breathing through honey and incense, and you begin to understand what luxury smelled like. By the evening, your body gleams and glows with polish and scent. Your hair shines. Your skin has been scrubbed nearly raw. You lie down on embroidered cushions, inhaling the lingering smoke of incense. For all the effort, the question remains, is this beauty ritual a gift, or is it just another layer of the prison? You're decorated like a temple idol, admired in theory, but never free to walk beyond the walls that make the admiration possible. You may think the walls of the harem keep the world outside at bay, but in truth they concentrate it. Politics does not stop at the gates. It seeps in through the guards, through the whispers of eunuchs, through the very structure of the household. You're not simply a woman in silk. You're a piece on a chessboard where every move matters, and where losing the game can mean your disappearance from memory. Inside the harem, intrigue is as common as perfume. Every woman, no matter her rank, lives under the awareness that favour is currency. A smile from the ruler, a small gift, or even a slightly longer glance can elevate someone overnight. The reverse is also true. A single misstep, a whisper of suspicion, and you could slide into obscurity or worse. This precarious balance makes the harem both a paradise of potential and a prison of paranoia. History is filled with accounts of women who gained extraordinary influence through the harem. In the Safavid court, the mother of the ruler often held enormous power, sometimes acting as regent during her son's minority. Even concubines who bore sons could rise to positions of wealth and political sway. Property grants, estates, and even control over trade revenues were not unheard of. Imagine the irony. You cannot walk outside the palace walls, but you might own vineyards and lands hundreds of miles away. You may never see them, but your signature decides their fate. This level of influence, however, came with consequences. Where power exists, so do rivals. The women of the harem were bound together by shared confinement, but divided by ambition. Every friendship was tinged with suspicion. Every conversation was layered with subtext. Sharing a sweet pastry might mean genuine kindness, or it might be a calculated gesture to win loyalty. Trust was always provisional. Persian culture valued loyalty and honour, but it also thrived on elaborate court rituals, and these rituals often spilled into the harem. Festivals, ceremonies, and official audiences brought out the full hierarchy of women, each dressed in their finest silks, each weighed down with jewellery that announced her rank. It looked like unity, a glittering display of imperial wealth, but beneath the surface it was a battlefield of glances and whispered comments. Who sat where? Who was presented first? Who wore what shade of silk? These details mattered more than the outcome of a skirmish on the frontier. Foreign travellers who glimpsed these ceremonies, usually through rumour rather than first-hand experience, often exaggerated them. Some described the harem as a den of endless plots, women poisoning each other's perfumes or bribing eunuchs for secret access. While much of that was fantasy, the truth was still sharp. The harem was a place where politics were distilled into personal relationships. Influence was gained not by armies, but by the art of being noticed. There are records suggesting that women of the harem sometimes influenced succession disputes. A concubine whose son was next in line could maneuver against rivals, securing alliances within the harem or with officials outside. Eunuchs, as gatekeepers, often became entangled in these intrigues, serving as messengers, informants, or even power brokers. The politics of the harem were not marginal. They could shape the empire itself. And yet, for the majority, politics was not about shaping the throne, but about daily survival. Align yourself with the wrong group of women and you risked isolation. Show too much ambition, and you risked suspicion. Show too little, and you risked invisibility. Every action carried double meaning. Even laughter could be dangerous if it was interpreted as mocking someone higher than you. Imagine the absurdity of watching every word and every smile as if your life depended on it, because in many ways it did. The gifts of favour were both dazzling and dangerous. A concubine might receive an embroidered robe stitched with gold thread, or a jewelled necklace worth a fortune. But these were never just gifts. They were signals to everyone else in the harem. The moment you received one, you became a target of jealousy, and jealousy had teeth. Rumours could spring up overnight. Perhaps your perfume was too strong. Perhaps you spoke too boldly. Perhaps you had bewitched the ruler with charms that skirted the edge of sorcery. Once a rumour started, it was almost impossible to extinguish. Persian society at large often associated women with the world of hidden knowledge, superstition, and unseen influence. This cultural lens meant that concubines could easily be accused of manipulation, or even witchcraft. While such accusations were often exaggerated by outsiders, the fear inside the harem was real. The line between being admired as clever and being accused of scheming was paper thin. You had to be ambitious enough to rise, but not so ambitious that you frightened those around you. Intrigue did not only flow upward toward the throne, it also flowed sideways among the women themselves. Stories survive of concubines forming alliances to protect one another, pooling influence against more powerful rivals. Others quietly traded information, slipping notes through attendants or bribing servants with sweets and coins. It was less Game of Thrones and more a never-ending chess match, where the pieces occasionally decided they wanted to move themselves. As you move through the tiled corridors, the weight of all this intrigue presses on you. The air is sweet with incense, the floors soft with carpets, yet your steps feel heavy. Every glance could be a test. Every smile could be a trap. The palace teaches you that survival is not about strength or beauty alone. It is about reading the currents of politics, catching the scent of favour like smoke before anyone else notices it, and staying one step ahead of rivals who may smile at you in the morning and slander you by nightfall. It is a strange kind of education, one that no tutor would ever write down. You learn to speak carefully, to listen more than you talk, to dress in ways that draw notice without offence. You learn that silence can be power, and that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is appear harmless. In the harem, survival is less about winning battles, and more about avoiding the wrong ones altogether. By the time the lamps are lit again, and the halls glow with golden shadow, you realise that politics here is not occasional. It is constant, woven into every moment of your life. You're not free to choose your path, but you're forced to choose how you walk it. And tomorrow, as new rumours bloom and new alliances form, you will face the same paradox again. The most beautiful prison in history is also the most political, and in its endless games of intrigue, your luxury is indistinguishable from your chains. The night stretches long inside the harem, and with silence comes another paradox. You're surrounded by music, poetry, and the arts, yet none of them belong to you. Entertainment here is not leisure, it is performance, display, and yet another layer of the palace machine. The Persian world has always been steeped in poetry and song. Even in the Achaemenid period, court life was thick with ritual recitations, hymns, and ceremonial music. By the time of the Safavids, poetry had become the empire's signature. Poets like Hafez and Rumi, though from different times, were recited endlessly, their words flowing like honey across the tiled halls. For the concubines, the arts were omnipresent. You might wake to the sound of a musician tuning a sitar, or drift to sleep with the hum of a lullaby carried faintly through the corridors. But like everything else in this world, entertainment was structured and controlled. There were musicians trained specifically to perform for the harem. Dancers practiced elaborate routines, often inspired by Persian storytelling traditions that blended gesture, song, and costume. These performances were not spontaneous bursts of joy. They were scheduled events, overseen by attendants, and carefully measured to reflect the majesty of the court. You watched, applauded when expected, and absorbed beauty that had been curated as much as your perfumes. Music itself carried political weight. Persian rulers used it to project refinement, power, and divine favour. An empire that could support orchestras, poets, and dancers was an empire overflowing with prosperity. When you heard the strings of a tar or the haunting notes of a ney flute, you were not simply listening to art. You were listening to propaganda dressed in melody. For a brief moment you might feel swept into beauty, but you could never forget that the beauty was staged. The harem also produced art. Women embroidered textiles, painted miniature manuscripts, and even wrote poetry of their own. Persian miniatures from the Safavid era often depict lush gardens, lovers meeting beneath cypress trees, and interiors filled with pattern and colour. Some of these works may have originated within the harem walls, crafted by women who had been trained in calligraphy and design. The irony is sharp. Their hands created masterpieces admired across the empire, but the artists themselves remained invisible, their names erased by the anonymity of their confinement. Entertainment also functioned as a way to contain restlessness. Hundreds of women confined together needed distraction, and so games, poetry recitals, and music filled the gaps between grooming rituals and ceremonies. Some played chess, a Persian invention refined over centuries. Others practiced recitation of epic poetry like the Shahnameh, the Book of Kings, which told of ancient heroes and battles. Imagine reciting tales of warriors who rode across open plains, while you yourself were forbidden to walk beyond the courtyard. The irony must have hung heavy in the air. Even laughter was curated. Stories were told by professional jesters and storytellers, often eunuchs or servants who doubled as entertainers. These tales mixed humour with moral lessons, reinforcing the idea that loyalty and obedience brought reward while rebellion brought disaster. The comedy was often sharp, mocking outsiders or rival courts, but never the palace itself. In a sense, the laughter you heard was another reminder that freedom of thought was as controlled as the fragrances burned in the lamps. Foreign visitors to Persia frequently noted the sophistication of its music and poetry. They marvelled at the instruments, the rhythms, the intricate verses, yet they often misunderstood the role of entertainment inside the harem. They imagined it as constant indulgence, a never-ending festival of beauty. The truth was more complex. Entertainment was constant, yes, but it was also choreographed, measured, and politicized. You never simply enjoyed music. You participated in a system where music kept order and appearances intact. There were moments of genuine pleasure, of course. A melody could stir something in you. A poem could remind you of a world outside the walls. A game of chess could briefly distract from the tension of survival. But even these moments were tinged with awareness. The arts here were not free expressions. They were instruments of the palace, and by extension, instruments of your confinement. Consider the symbolism of gardens, which appeared constantly in Persian poetry and art. The garden was paradise, a place of beauty and harmony. Inside the harem, gardens were real, with fountains, fruit trees, and carefully laid tiles. You walked among them as poetry was recited, the air thick with fragrance, the night sky hidden behind high walls. The garden was both real and metaphor. It promised paradise, but reminded you that paradise was enclosed. The performances were often seasonal as well. During Nowruz, the Persian New Year, the harem came alive with ceremonies, music, and feasts. Lanterns illuminated the gardens, trays of sweets circulated, dancers moved in time with drums. For a moment, the place seemed transformed into a festival ground, yet the rules remained. You celebrated, but only within boundaries. The world rejoiced in renewal, but your world remained circumscribed by the palace walls. Even the act of listening was a ritual. You could not simply sprawl lazily and hum along to a tune. Posture, attentiveness, and responses were observed. Applauding at the wrong time or laughing too loudly could mark you as uncouth. Entertainment doubled as etiquette training, teaching you how to sit, how to smile, how to embody the refinement expected of the ruler's household. It was not enough to be beautiful. You had to perform beauty, and the arts were part of that stage. By the time the lamps burn low and the last notes fade into silence, you are left with a peculiar emptiness. The music stirred your soul, but only briefly. The poetry whispered of freedom, but only in words. The laughter felt real, but it was carefully managed. You lie down once again on embroidered cushions, aware that even joy itself is rationed here, distributed like perfumes and silks, and as your eyes close, the paradox tightens around you again. Luxury or prison, delight or duty. In the harem, even beauty comes with chains you cannot see. The clatter of trays returns, and with it comes one of the most seductive illusions of the harem. Food. If perfume is the language of seduction, and politics is the language of survival, then food is the language of control. You may think that endless feasts would be the silver lining of confinement, but the truth is far more peculiar. Dining here is less about pleasure, and more about discipline disguised as indulgence. Persian cuisine was legendary across the ancient and medieval world. The empire spanned regions that funneled spices, grains and fruits from every corner of Eurasia. From saffron grown in Khorasan to sugar imported from India, from pomegranates in the orchards of Shiraz to rice cultivated along the Caspian Sea. The kitchens of Persia were unrivaled. Travellers from Europe often marvelled at the abundance. One account from the 17th century described Persian feasts where dozens of dishes were served in a single sitting, each more elaborate than the last. You, as a concubine, are surrounded by this abundance, but you're not free to consume it as you wish. Meals are distributed according to rank. The chief consort and the ruler's favourites receive the richest cuts of lamb, the choicest sweets, and the freshest fruits. Others receive less extravagant portions, though still far beyond what common Persians could imagine. Rice steamed with saffron, stews of lentils and herbs, flatbreads baked hot in the palace ovens. To an outsider, it would seem like luxury, and it is, but the hierarchy of food reminds you constantly of your place. Your stomach is fed, but your status is written in every bite. The act of dining itself is ceremonial. Meals are taken on carpets laid with trays, and the etiquette is strict. You must wash your hands with rose water before eating, a practice not only hygienic but symbolic of refinement. You tear bread with your fingers, dip it into stews and avoid making noise. Chewing too loudly or eating too quickly marks you as vulgar. Even the way you sit, legs folded neatly, posture straight, becomes part of the performance. Food is not only nourishment, it is a lesson in composure. There are entire rules about sharing. Passing food to another without permission is forbidden, not because the palace feared theft, but because sharing is a form of alliance, and alliances are dangerous in a place where every friendship might be political. Even a fig passed between two women could be interpreted as the seed of conspiracy. The absurdity is rich. You're surrounded by piles of almonds, trays of dates, pyramids of sweets, yet you cannot offer a single one without the possibility of punishment. Persian cuisine loved balance. Dishes were carefully constructed to combine sweet and sour, warm and cool, rich and light. A stew might mix lamb with prunes and almonds, seasoned with cinnamon and vinegar. Rice might be layered with barberries and pistachios, jewelled like a crown. Yogurt, flavoured with herbs or garlic, cooled the palate. Sherbets made from fruit juices and snow offered refreshment in the summer heat. You taste all of this, yet you taste it within the walls. The empire's bounty flows to your lips, but you cannot even glance at the markets where these ingredients originated. The sheer abundance created excess, and excess created rules. Gluttony was frowned upon, not because the palace cared for moderation, but because losing composure reflected poorly on the refinement of the harem. Concubines were expected to eat gracefully, never greedily. If you indulged too heavily in sweets, you risked ridicule, for restraint was considered elegant. Imagine the irony. Outside the palace, peasants measured meals in survival. Inside, you measured them in dignity, forced to pretend indifference to the mountains of sugared almonds and saffron rice that surrounded you. Banquets marked the calendar of the harem. During Nowruz, the Persian New Year, feasts became displays of imperial wealth. Tables overflowed with candied fruits, roasted meats, and elaborate pastries shaped into flowers. Lanterns illuminated the courtyards, and music accompanied the meals. For the concubines, these were less celebrations than spectacles. You ate, you smiled, you performed refinement, but you could not escape the awareness that the feast was staged as much for appearances as for appetite. Food also carried symbolic meaning. Pomegranates symbolized fertility, saffron symbolized wealth, honey symbolized sweetness and loyalty. When these foods appeared in abundance, they carried unspoken messages about the harem's function as the engine of dynastic survival. Your body was nourished not only for pleasure, but for purpose. Even the food became part of the empire's politics. Foreigners often misunderstood Persian feasts. They described them as orgies of indulgence, endless courses of meats and wines. In truth, the harem's dining was carefully ordered. Yes, wine was consumed, though Islamic law officially restricted it. In the privacy of the palace, goblets of pomegranate wine or fermented date liquor appeared at banquets, and the eunuchs ensured that cups were filled in sequence. But drunkenness was not permitted. Losing control of one's composure, even in drink, was a dangerous error. The harem's luxury was never freedom. It was luxury on a leash. The kitchens themselves were massive operations, staffed by dozens of cooks, bakers and servers. Historical records from Safavid Isfahan describe palace kitchens that consumed staggering quantities of grain, meat and fruit daily. Imagine the logistics. While you sat on carpets sipping rosewater sherbets, entire teams of labourers slaughtered animals, kneaded bread, stirred vats of stew, and hauled snow from distant mountains to chill the drinks. The empire's resources flowed through these kitchens, and you were one of the many mouths that consumed them. But the food was never yours. It was a symbol, a ration, a performance. Even hunger was political. If you displeased someone higher in the hierarchy, your meals might suddenly diminish. The bread might be stale, the stew thin, the sweets withheld. It was not starvation. The palace would never risk scandal by letting a concubine waste away. But it was enough to remind you that even your appetite was subject to surveillance. You were fed, yes, but you were also managed. By the time the meal ends, the carpets are stained with saffron and pomegranate juice, the trays cleared by attendants who carry away the leftovers. Somewhere outside the palace walls, peasants gnaw on barley bread and onions, lucky to have meat once a month. You lie back on cushions, your stomach full of delicacies they could not imagine, yet the taste leaves you uneasy, because you know what the feast really was. Not a celebration, not freedom. It was another reminder that luxury and prison can taste almost identical, depending on who holds the tray. The harem is not just a place of perfumes, silks and politics. It is also a place of bodies, and where there are bodies there is sickness. The truth is that even in the most perfumed corners of the palace, health is always fragile. A single cough in these enclosed corridors can ripple like a storm, and for every jewel that sparkles on your neck, there is a physician somewhere deciding what to do when your stomach refuses the feast. Persian medicine was both advanced and bewildering. By the time of the Safavid dynasty, physicians drew on a long tradition that stretched back through the Greeks, the Arabs, and the ancient Persians themselves. They relied heavily on the theory of the four humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, a system inherited from Hippocrates and Galen but adapted through Islamic scholarship. Balance was health. Imbalance was illness, and so, if your skin grew pale or your appetite vanished, the physician did not ask about germs. Germs were centuries away. Instead, he wondered if your black bile had risen, or if your phlegm was too dominant. Imagine having a stomachache and being told it was the fault of an invisible fluid sloshing about in mysterious ratios. That was medicine. Inside the harem, physicians were frequent visitors. Their job was not only to care for the women, but also to protect the future of the dynasty. A sick concubine was not simply a patient. She was a potential mother of heirs, a valuable asset in a dynastic machine. Records from the Safavid period suggest that physicians assigned to the harem were well paid and carefully chosen. Some specialised in gynecology and obstetrics, areas of medicine that were particularly important in a setting where fertility determined fate. Treatments ranged from the practical to the absurd. Herbal remedies were common. Mint was prescribed for digestion, rosewater for headaches, fennel for menstrual pain. Honey was applied to wounds and mixed with vinegar as a tonic. Opium was used liberally, sometimes for pain, sometimes simply to induce sleep. Persian physicians prized opium so highly that travellers wrote of its ubiquity in Persian medicine. You might be given a lump of it for cramps or for melancholy, which is a polite way of saying depression. For a brief while the world softened and the walls felt less close, but the relief was temporary. Bloodletting was another favoured practice. If a physician judged that your humours were unbalanced, he might apply leeches or cut a vein to let blood flow. This was supposed to restore equilibrium. To you, it felt more like being slowly drained in the name of balance you could never see. Yet this was not considered barbaric at the time. It was the cutting edge of science, as logical to them as antibiotics are to us. The eunuchs supervised these procedures, ensuring that the physician's work remained within the bounds of palace protocol. Your body was both patient and property, and every treatment reminded you of that fact. Diet was also prescribed like medicine. If your humours were thought to be hot, you were fed cooling foods like cucumbers or yogurt. If they were cold, you were given warming foods like lamb stews or spices. Physicians kept lists of foods ranked according to their qualities, assigning them as if they were pills. Imagine being told to eat quince for melancholy, or to avoid melons because they might increase your phlegm. It was part science, part guesswork, and part performance of care. Superstition crept into medicine as well. Amulets inscribed with Quranic verses were worn to protect against illness. Incantations were whispered over cups of water, which were then drunk as remedies. Astrology played its part too. Physicians sometimes considered the position of the stars before prescribing treatment, believing that celestial alignments influence the body. The famous zodiac man diagrams, though more common in Europe, had their Persian equivalents, linking body parts to constellations. If Mars was in the wrong place, your stomachache was not just yours, it was written in the heavens. For all its strangeness, Persian medicine did achieve remarkable things. Surgical instruments unearthed from the Islamic Golden Age show a level of sophistication that rivals later European practice. Texts by Avicenna, especially the canon of medicine, were studied for centuries, offering insights into anatomy, pharmacology, and diagnosis. These works influenced physicians far beyond Persia, reaching Europe through translation. Yet in the harem, the experience was less about intellectual progress, and more about being a test subject for whatever theory was fashionable that century. Illness also had social consequences. A concubine who fell ill too often risked slipping into obscurity, dismissed as unfit for the ruler's attention. On the other hand, one who recovered swiftly might be praised as vigorous and blessed. Even your immune system could become political. A fever could erase months of grooming and performance, while recovery could suddenly elevate your standing. Health was not private, it was public currency. There were darker undertones too. Poisoning was a constant fear in courtly life. Though many tales of poisoned cups and rival concubines are likely exaggerated by travellers eager for scandal, the paranoia was real. Every physician was both healer and potential suspect. Every cup of sherbet was both refreshment and risk. Eunuchs tasted food and drink before it reached important lips, but suspicion never vanished. You lived in a place where even a stomachache could spark whispers of treachery. For the ordinary Persian outside these walls, medicine was simpler and harsher. Villagers relied on herbs, prayers, and the occasional travelling healer. Access to opium, saffron tonics, and learned physicians was unimaginable. In that sense, the harem was privileged. But privilege here was always double-edged. You received treatments that others could not dream of, yet those treatments were imposed, monitored, and sometimes painful. A village woman might suffer quietly, but at least she chose her herbs. You were treated, but you were also handled, your health a matter of empire. At night, after yet another dose of rosewater syrup or a poultice of crushed herbs smeared across your skin, you lie awake in the smoky glow of oil lamps. Your body is polished, perfumed, and now dosed with remedies both fragrant and bitter. You think of the strange logic that rules your health. Invisible humours, celestial alignments, herbs from distant mountains, opium from hidden fields, and leeches wriggling on your skin. Luxury or prison, wellness or surveillance. Here, even your heartbeat belongs to the palace. The greatest weight in the harem is not the silk or the jewels or even the endless rules. It is the weight of expectation. Your body is not only polished for beauty, it is prepared for reproduction. The dynasty depends on the wombs of the harem, and so fertility becomes both privilege and burden. You're not simply a woman in confinement, you're a vessel of empire, and that role can raise you to unimaginable heights, or reduce you to silence. Childbirth has always been perilous, and here it is no less so. Despite the physicians and the endless rituals of cleanliness, the harem cannot escape the dangers of pregnancy. Complications are frequent, infant mortality is high, and even with the best care of the age, the risks to mother and child remain stark. But unlike most women in Persia, your pregnancies are not private struggles. They are dynastic events. Every pregnancy is scrutinized. Every rumor of a swelling belly becomes palace news. Every childbirth a matter of politics. A concubine who bears a son changes her life instantly. Suddenly she's no longer simply an ornament. She's the mother of a potential heir, a position that can bring land, wealth, and authority. In the Safavid dynasty, women who bore sons were granted estates and political influence. The mother of a ruler could even act as regent, shaping the empire during his youth. The stakes could not be higher. Bearing a child is not merely a personal milestone, it is the fulcrum of power. And yet, failure is equally sharp. A woman who cannot conceive, or who bears only daughters, risks fading into the shadows. The hierarchy of the harem is cruel in this regard. Beauty may keep you visible for a time, but fertility determines your survival. You might be surrounded by perfumes and jewels, but if you do not produce heirs, you are little more than background in the palace tapestry. The irony is brutal. You are pampered like a queen, but judged like livestock. Fertility rituals abound in the harem. Amulets inscribed with prayers are worn around the neck, believed to protect against infertility. Baths in rosewater or milk are prescribed as remedies. Certain foods are recommended to increase the chances of conception. Pomegranates for fertility, honey for vitality, saffron for strength. Physicians consult their books of humours, prescribing diets to balance hot and cold qualities within the body. If your womb is too cold, you're told to eat warming foods like lamb or cinnamon. If it is too hot, you're steered toward cucumbers and yogurt. The advice is as contradictory as it is constant. Astrology plays its role as well. The timing of conception is sometimes aligned with favourable star positions. If Venus is in a certain house, conception is said to be more likely. If Saturn looms, caution is advised. Imagine being told that the stars themselves must approve before your womb may succeed. Your body is not only under palace scrutiny, but under cosmic surveillance. Childbirth itself is a storm. The midwives of the harem, often older women with years of experience, guide the process. They use techniques passed down for generations, massaging the belly with oils, encouraging the mother to squat rather than lie flat, chanting prayers as the child enters the world. Herbal remedies are administered to ease pain, though ease is a relative term when opium and wine are the best options available. The room fills with smoke from incense intended to drive away evil spirits. Every groan is both a personal cry and a political moment, for the future of the dynasty hangs on the outcome. If the child survives, celebrations follow. Gifts are showered upon the mother, her status elevated immediately. If it is a son, the celebrations are louder, more elaborate and more dangerous, for rivals now see her as a figure of power. If the child dies, silence follows. Infant mortality was heartbreakingly common, and in the harem, the grief could not even be private. A failed birth was not just a personal tragedy, but a political failure, whispered about in the corridors with the same weight as scandal. The records that survive are uneven, but they reveal glimpses of this paradox. Inscriptions from Persepolis list rations allocated to women who bore children, showing that their roles were recognised and rewarded. Later chronicles describe powerful queen mothers who shaped policy, evidence of how central reproduction was to dynastic stability. Yet just as many stories vanish without detail, their subjects swallowed by the silence of failure. History remembers the successful mothers, it forgets the countless others. For you, fertility is never far from thought. Every ritual, every meal, every medical treatment carries the shadow of expectation. Even the perfumes are chosen for their supposed effect on vitality. You might be given saffron mixed with milk to drink, or rosewater syrups believed to strengthen the womb. Midwives whisper remedies, some sensible, others absurd, all repeated with the weight of tradition. You swallow them not because you believe, but because belief is required. What is strangest is how much this obsession with fertility limits your freedom further. Pregnancy does not release you from confinement, it tightens it. You are monitored more closely, guarded more carefully, your body treated as both sacred and fragile. The gardens may be yours to walk, but only with attendants at your side. Every step is watched, every breath measured. You are a shrine to the possibility of heirs, and shrines are protected even when they would rather be free. The tension between luxury and prison is sharper here than anywhere else. On one hand, you receive the best care of the age, attended by skilled physicians, surrounded by attendants who wait on your needs. On the other hand, you are reduced to function. Your body is a tool of succession, your worth measured in swaddled bundles. You might lie on cushions embroidered with gold thread, but if the cradle beside you remains empty, those cushions feel like stone. At night the lamps flicker and the corridors quiet, but the pressure does not fade. You lie awake, hand resting on your stomach, wondering whether your body will rise or fall in the unspoken contest of the harem. The perfumes still cling to your skin, the silks still cover you, but beneath it all the truth lingers. In the harem, luxury is never just luxury. It is always tied to survival. And survival here is measured in children. The air in the harem is heavy not only with perfume but with tension. Luxury might be abundant, but control is even more so, and every rule has teeth. For all the silks, jewels and feasts, the harem functions on fear as much as on refinement. Discipline is its invisible skeleton. You can see the beauty, you can smell the incense, but beneath it lies the constant reminder that every move has consequences. Punishment here does not always roar, often it whispers. Sometimes it looks like silence, a sudden exclusion from gatherings, a meal that arrives smaller than before, or a servant who stops bowing quite as low. These small signals tell everyone that someone has fallen from grace. They are not accidents, they are warnings. In a world where gossip spreads faster than fire, subtle humiliation can be more effective than open scolding. To be ignored in the harem is not peace, it is a sentence. Yet there were harsher measures too. Accounts from travellers and chroniclers suggest that women could be confined to smaller chambers for disobedience. Some sources describe darkened rooms where light barely entered. where the offender remained for days or weeks, her absence noted by the others as proof that the system could strike anyone. In some dynasties, a concubine who committed serious violations, like unauthorized contact with outsiders or suspected plotting, could be removed entirely. Sometimes this meant exile to a distant estate, sometimes disappearance into silence. The harem did not often publicize what happened to the punished. Ambiguity itself was a tool. The paranoia of poisoning made punishments even stranger. Because suspicion was constant, a concubine accused of slipping something into another's food or perfume might find herself interrogated by eunuchs or physicians. Proof was almost impossible to find, yet suspicion alone was damaging. Imagine living in a place where a headache after dinner could spark rumours that you were a poisoner. Suddenly the sweet almond pastry you shared was not kindness but potential evidence. The presence of eunuchs intensified this sense of surveillance. They were not only guards but also informants, tasked with observing behaviour and reporting to higher authorities. In many ways they were the law of the harem. A concubine who defied instructions might not face the ruler directly. She would face the eunuchs, and their punishments were practical and immediate. Restricted movements, withdrawal of privileges, even physical chastisement were within their reach. Their authority was absolute in the corridors where no one else could enter. Physical punishment was not the everyday method, but it was known. Some accounts describe women being whipped for insolence, though usually in private to preserve the palace's aura of perfection. Other stories tell of women forced to stand for hours in courtyards, baking under the Persian sun until faint with exhaustion. Whether every detail is true or not, the point is clear. The harem's luxury always came with consequences. You were indulged, yes, but only so long as you obeyed. Punishment could also be collective. If a scandal broke out, such as rumours of an affair or conspiracy, the entire group might be restricted. Outings to the gardens cancelled, entertainment halted, sweets withheld. It was less about punishing the guilty than about reminding everyone that the harem functioned as a single body. If one part of it rotted, all of it suffered. That collective responsibility kept women policing one another, ensuring that any whiff of rebellion was stifled before it reached the wrong ears. Even gifts carried the shadow of discipline. If your jewellery suddenly stopped arriving, if your perfumes were of cheaper quality than before, you knew you were being marked. It was as effective as a blow. The harem was built on appearances, so losing a visible symbol of favour was a public shaming. Imagine watching another woman's silk gleam brighter, while your own fabric dulled. It was not random, it was deliberate, a sign that you were slipping. The most terrifying punishments were the ones no one spoke about. Travellers hinted at women drowned in palace pools, their names erased from records, their fates whispered only in rumour. Whether these tales were fact or embellishment, the fear they created was real. In a place defined by secrecy, imagination filled in the gaps, and fear was often more powerful than truth. If a concubine vanished suddenly, no explanation was needed. The silence itself taught the lesson. This climate of paranoia shaped daily life in ways that outsiders could hardly understand. Every action was measured. Laughter was weighed against who might be listening. Meals were eaten with caution, not only for etiquette, but because no one wanted to be seen as greedy or careless. Even a compliment could be dangerous if it was interpreted as mockery. The safest choice was often restraint, but restraint itself could look suspicious if taken too far. Survival became a performance of moderation. Punishment extended to emotional life as well. Friendships were fragile, alliances risky. If your closest companion was accused of breaking rules, association with her could drag you down too. The safest bonds were those kept shallow, yet shallow bonds left you isolated. The system ensured that true solidarity was nearly impossible. Every woman was both neighbour and rival, and paranoia was the glue that held the harem together. Compared to the world outside, this was its own unique brand of confinement. A farmer's wife might face hunger or poverty, but she at least spoke freely in her home. A villager might suffer under taxation, but he could curse the tax collector in private. You, by contrast, lived in a place where even your size could be noticed, where discipline reached into the smallest corners of your day. Luxury was the curtain, but punishment was the structure holding it up. At night, lying on cushions embroidered with golden threads, you think about the strange logic of it all. The lamps glow, the air is thick with incense, and yet beneath the stillness you can feel the vigilance. The palace never truly sleeps. Eunuchs pace the halls, ears always open. Attendants whisper quietly, always aware of who listens. And you, stretched out in comfort, know that the prison walls are invisible but constant. The paradox sharpens again. You're surrounded by indulgence, yet you live with the constant hum of paranoia. Every sweet, every jewel, every moment of music carries the shadow of discipline. The harem is not a place of chaos. It is a place of order so strict that even joy must pass through rules. You're both cherished and controlled, both adorned and contained, and as your eyes close, the silence presses on you heavier than any jewel, reminding you that in this world, paradise has teeth. The palace walls do not simply hold you, they shape you. Every step you take is guided by architecture designed to impress and to contain. To live as a Persian concubine is to move through a building that is both a masterpiece of beauty and a masterclass in control. You're surrounded by tiles so intricate they seem endless, gardens so perfect they feel divine, and yet none of it is yours to escape. Architecture here is not neutral. It is the most silent and most powerful of your guards. Persian architecture is legendary. The great empires of Persia built structures that dazzled visitors for centuries. From the Achaemenid palaces at Persepolis to the Safavid masterpieces of Isfahan, the Persians were known for their love of symmetry, light, and decoration. Domes soared overhead, covered in turquoise tiles that caught the sun and turned it into fire. Courtyards stretched wide, centered on fountains that mirrored the stars at night. Even the smallest chamber could be decorated with mosaics that would make European cathedrals look plain. To live inside this was to be overwhelmed daily by splendor. But the splendor was not for you alone. It was for the empire, for the guests who imagined its perfection, for the ruler whose power radiated through every arch and minaret. And for you, the harem was carefully designed to look like paradise while functioning as prison. Windows faced inward to gardens, never outward to the streets. Corridors twisted into dead ends, designed to confuse intruders and confine inhabitants. The high walls kept out spies but also kept you in. Paradise on the inside, barriers at every edge. The gardens were the crown jewels of Persian architecture. Known as Chahar Bagh, or four-part gardens, they were designed as earthly visions of paradise. Water channels divided the land into 4 quadrants, symbolizing the rivers of heaven. Cypress trees lined the paths, roses filled the air with fragrance, fountains gurgled constantly to soften the heat. You could walk these gardens, touch the flowers, sit beside the pools, but always within boundaries. You were enclosed inside a paradise so perfect it became a cage. Imagine smelling roses every day, and realizing they are the perfume of confinement. Decoration itself was another form of control. Walls were covered in endless patterns of geometry and floral motifs. Persian architects avoided blank space, filling every surface with detail. To the eye, it was stunning, overwhelming, even hypnotic. But it also had a psychological effect. Surrounded by infinite patterns, you began to feel small, a single figure in a tapestry too vast to comprehend. The building reminded you constantly that you were part of something larger, that individuality mattered less than harmony. Beauty was never just beauty, it was instruction. Light was used the same way. Domes and arches were pierced with small openings, letting shafts of sunlight fall at sharp angles. In the morning, golden beams illuminated the tiles. At night, oil lamps turned the mosaics into a shimmering sea. It was magical, yes, but it was also manipulative. Light was carefully controlled, guiding your eyes where architects wanted them to go. You never saw the open horizon. You saw only curated fragments of sky. In this way, even the heavens were rationed. Acoustics mattered too. Persian architects understood how sound moved through stone and tile. In the harem, this meant whispers travelled easily. A murmur in one corner could be caught in another. Privacy was nearly impossible. Every giggle, every sigh, every soft argument might carry farther than you expected. The building itself seemed to conspire with the eunuchs, amplifying secrets and punishing those who forgot to guard their tongues. You learned quickly that walls not only had ears, they had voices. The arrangement of rooms reinforced hierarchy. The most favoured women occupied chambers nearest the ruler's quarters, decorated with the richest materials. Lesser concubines lived farther away, in smaller rooms with fewer windows and simpler designs. Servants and attendants were pushed even deeper into the labyrinth. The architecture itself announced rank before you spoke. Walk through the corridors and you could tell who mattered by the size of her doorway and the polish of her tiles. The palace was a map of status written in stone. Foreigners often imagined harems as open playgrounds of freedom within the palace, but the truth is that movement was carefully controlled by design. Narrow corridors forced you to walk in single file. Courtyards opened and closed with gates. Staircases led to guarded balconies. Even the water channels that looked so idyllic served as boundaries, dividing spaces into zones. Architecture was as much about surveillance as about beauty. The palace was less a home and more a diagram of control. Consider Isfahan, the jewel of Safavid Persia. The royal palace there, Ali Kapu, overlooked vast squares and boulevards filled with markets and celebrations. Yet inside, the harem was tucked into private courtyards, cut off from the bustle outside. From the balconies you could glimpse the world, hear the sounds of drums and trade, but you could not step into it. The design created constant tension. The world was visible but untouchable, audible but unreachable. Beauty sharpened confinement instead of softening it. Even the furniture and fabrics reinforced this. Floors were covered with carpets so soft that footsteps made no sound. Silence became part of the architecture. Cushions and curtains muted the air, giving a sense of intimacy, but also muffling protest. Heavy doors with ornate carvings sealed chambers so completely that those inside might as well have been buried. You sat on velvet cushions, leaned against silk curtains, and realised that softness could smother as effectively as chains. What makes Persian architecture remarkable is its ability to overwhelm the senses. Colours, sounds, light, fragrance, texture. All of it was orchestrated to create awe. In the harem, that awe became another kind of prison. You were dazzled daily into forgetting that you were confined. Or at least you were meant to forget. Yet the irony remained. The very beauty designed to impress outsiders was the same beauty that reminded you of your limits. At night, when the oil lamps flicker and shadows ripple across the mosaics, the paradox is complete. You're in one of the most beautiful buildings on earth, a palace that visitors wrote about with envy and wonder. And yet for you, those same walls curve inward like bars. The gardens are lush, the fountains sing, the ceilings soar, but you know the truth. This paradise is designed not only to delight but to contain. You do not just live in the harem lives in you, shaping your every step, your every glance, your very sense of freedom. The rhythm of your life in the harem is not set by your desires, but by the clockwork of routine. For all the splendour that surrounds you, the truth is that most days look remarkably alike. There are no errands to run, no markets to visit, no fields to tend. The palace provides everything, and in doing so, strips away the unpredictability of life. Routine becomes both comfort and torment. The morning begins with attendants arriving quietly, their arms full of basins and oils. Water is poured, bodies washed, perfumes applied. Every day the same kohl is painted around your eyes, the same henna stains your fingers, the same rose water rinses your hair. It is a cycle of endless grooming. On one hand, This is luxury far beyond what most people in the Empire could imagine. On the other, it is a reminder that your body is a daily project, managed and prepared for someone else's gaze. After the morning rituals, meals follow: bread, rice, stews, fruit, sherbets. Always abundant, always rationed according to rank, always eaten with the same etiquette. There is no wandering to the kitchen to choose what you like. Food arrives on trays, dictated by hierarchy, consumed under watchful eyes. Even the act of eating becomes mechanical, repeated until taste blurs into habit. You might dine on saffron rice and honeyed lamb one day, and nearly the same the next. Luxury without variety quickly feels less like indulgence and more like monotony. The afternoons are filled with managed leisure. Some women sew or embroider, their needles dancing across fabrics that will drape the palace halls. Others read or copy poetry, their calligraphy becoming part of the Empire's silent archives. Chessboards are laid out, dice games played, music practiced, yet all of it takes place within the same walls, under the same painted ceilings, within the same gardens. The repetition wears on you. You may play 1,000 games of chess, but the board never changes. Waiting is perhaps the most exhausting part of the routine. You wait to be noticed. You wait for news from beyond the walls. You wait for your rank to rise or fall, for your fate to shift by chance or by rumour. Waiting defines the hours more than any activity. The women around you wait as well, eyes glancing at doors that rarely open, ears straining for footsteps that might mean opportunity. It is a constant suspense that rarely resolves, stretching days into years. Historical records confirm this strange monotony. While outsiders imagine the harem as a place of endless activity, in reality many women spent their lives in quiet obscurity, never called upon, never recognised, never leaving. Some accounts describe concubines who lived their entire lives within the palace, aging among silks and perfumes, forgotten except by the attendants who prepared their meals. Their lives were preserved in luxury but erased in meaning. The architecture amplifies this sense of sameness. The patterns on the walls repeat endlessly, fractals of geometry that loop upon themselves. The fountains gurgle at the same pace day after day. The gardens bloom with roses every season, their petals falling in predictable cycles. The palace is designed to be eternal, and living inside eternity becomes exhausting when you're not allowed to alter it. Religion adds its rhythm too. Calls to prayer mark the hours, echoing faintly through the palace courtyards. Eunuchs remind the women of proper times for devotion, and prayer carpets are rolled out. Faith becomes another structure of routine, a spiritual schedule layered on top of the physical one. The irony is clear. Even prayer is confined to specific places and times, regulated by the same system that regulates meals and baths. Some moments break the monotony, but not always pleasantly. Sudden rumours spark waves of tension. Perhaps someone has fallen out of favour, perhaps another has been elevated. The corridors buzz for a day, only to fall silent again when the news fades. Festivals like Nowruz interrupt with music and feasts, but even these are carefully staged. The decorations change, the sweets are more elaborate, but the rules remain. You celebrate, but you do not escape. The psychological toll of this repetition is enormous. Luxury without freedom becomes suffocating. You lie on embroidered cushions, your body polished and perfumed, yet your mind circles the same narrow track. The same gardens, the same meals, the same faces, the same routines. The harem was designed to impress with abundance, but abundance without variation creates a prison of monotony. Outside the palace, life is harder but freer. A farmer's wife rises with the sun, tends to animals, walks through markets, talks with neighbours. Her life is full of labour, but also of change. Seasons alter her days, harvests shift her meals, festivals bring surprises. You, by contrast, live in a world where even the seasons are muffled. Snow might fall outside the city, but in the courtyards the fountains still flow, and the roses still bloom, as if nature itself has been tamed. It is paradise sterilized into repetition. Entertainment offers some relief, but it too falls into cycles. The same musicians play the same instruments, the same poems are recited, the same dances performed. The artistry is impressive, but it loses impact when repeated endlessly. A line of Hafez that once stirred your heart becomes just another sound, dulled by overuse. The palace drowns beauty in excess until even splendour feels ordinary. At night, as you lie on your bed of silks, the routine continues. Lamps are lit, perfumes burned, attendants prepare your chamber. The same gestures, the same sounds, the same scents. The day ends as it began, repeating in a loop that stretches across months and years. Time becomes difficult to measure when every day feels nearly identical. You cannot tell one season from another, one year from the next. The palace is timeless, but for you, timelessness feels like erasure. The paradox of luxury sharpens again. You live with abundance that outsiders would envy, yet abundance without freedom is monotony disguised as paradise. The daily routine of the harem proves that prison does not always mean suffering. Sometimes it means comfort so repetitive that it numbs you into silence. And as your eyes close, the question lingers. Is it better to live in hardship with freedom, or in luxury without choice? The palace never answers. It only repeats. The figures who move most freely in the harem are not the concubines, but the eunuchs. They are your guards, your messengers, your shadows. They open and close the doors, decide when you may pass, and whisper reports that travel faster than gossip. In a world where every woman is watched and every visitor restricted, the eunuchs are the ones who stitch the system together. You see them everywhere, silent one moment, commanding the next. They are the paradoxical rulers of this prison of luxury. Eunuchs existed in many empires, from China to Byzantium, but Persia elevated their role to an art form. By the Safavid era, they were indispensable to the palace. They guarded the entrances, patrolled the corridors, and oversaw the routines of the concubines. They were considered safe precisely because they could not father children, which made them, in theory, neutral guardians of dynastic purity. But safety is relative. A eunuch with knowledge of every whisper and every glance was far from neutral. He was a reservoir of power. You feel their presence constantly. They escort you to gardens, stand silently during meals, and hover nearby when physicians visit. Their eyes miss nothing. If you laugh too loudly, they notice. If you exchange a glance that lasts a second too long, they notice. Their role is surveillance disguised as service. Some smile, some remain cold, but all carry the authority of the palace behind them. Displease a eunuch, and your life becomes instantly harder. Your meals arrive late, your outings shorten, your requests vanish into silence. The eunuchs do not need to punish openly, they simply stop granting access. Historically, eunuchs could rise to extraordinary power. In the Safavid court, some eunuchs controlled access to the ruler himself, deciding who entered the throne room and who was kept waiting. Others oversaw financial matters, managing estates and treasuries linked to the harem. They were not merely guards, they were administrators, bureaucrats, and political players. European visitors often noted with amazement how much influence these men wielded, though they rarely understood the subtlety of their power. A eunuch might never hold an official title, yet his word could tilt decisions at the highest level. The methods of recruitment were grim. Boys were often taken from foreign lands, sometimes enslaved in war, sometimes purchased in markets, and subjected to castration. Those who survived the procedure entered palace service. Many came from the Caucasus, Central Asia, or Africa, their origins deliberately distant to prevent divided loyalties. The brutality of their beginnings was hidden behind the polished dignity of their roles, but the reality was always present. Every eunuch was a product of violence, turned into a tool of empire. Their loyalties were complicated. On one hand, they served the ruler absolutely. On the other, their lives were entwined with the women of the harem. They carried messages, arranged schedules, smuggled gifts, and sometimes even served as confidants. Some concubines trusted them deeply, offering bribes of sweets, coins, or favours in exchange for information. A single whispered hint from a eunuch could warn of rising suspicion, or reveal which way the ruler's mood was turning. Trusting them was dangerous, but ignoring them was worse. Eunuchs were also essential in maintaining discipline. They enforced rules with a mixture of subtlety and force. A concubine who disobeyed might find herself locked in her quarters, her outings cancelled, her access to luxuries reduced. The eunuchs carried the keys, both literal and figurative. They decided when to unlock doors, when to admit visitors, when to escort you across the courtyards. In a sense, your freedom was not limited by the palace walls, but by their decisions. The architecture reinforced their role. Corridors narrowed into choke points where eunuchs stood guard, ensuring no one passed unseen. Staircases ended at guarded balconies. Courtyards had gates always manned by watchful eyes. Even in the gardens, a eunuch lingered nearby, close enough to hear but far enough to appear discreet. The palace itself was built for surveillance, and the eunuchs were the human embodiment of that design. Despite their grim origins, some eunuchs managed to amass wealth and status. They were given estates, commanded servants, and even built alliances with officials outside the palace. Chroniclers mention eunuchs who became advisors to rulers, influencing diplomacy and war. In some cases, their influence was so great that they shaped succession itself, quietly favouring one potential heir over another. Imagine the irony. You live among concubines who hope for power through childbirth, while the eunuch who can never father a child decides which child inherits the throne. For you, the eunuchs are both protection and threat. They keep out intruders, ensure that no outsider dares breach the harem, and preserve the privacy of the palace. Yet they are also the enforcers of every rule that confines you. They are the ones who remind you that laughter must be measured, meals must be rationed, appearances must be perfect. Without them, the harem would collapse into chaos. With them, it becomes a machine of order. The presence of eunuchs also shapes the culture of fear. Their silence is unnerving. They move quietly, observe constantly, and report selectively. You never know which of your words might travel beyond the harem, carried by lips that never seem to open. That uncertainty is the essence of their power. They do not need to punish directly. The possibility that they might is enough. At night, when the lamps burn low and shadows stretch along the tiled corridors, you sometimes hear their footsteps echoing faintly. They never fully sleep, never fully vanish. They are the invisible walls within the walls, the living locks on the palace gates. You may be surrounded by silks, perfumes and gardens, but the eunuchs are the reminder that luxury here is never free. It is watched, measured, and managed at every step. The paradox becomes sharper again. The eunuchs protect you from the outside world, but they also protect the outside world from you. They are both your guardians and your captors, both indispensable allies and potential enemies. In their silence you hear the truth of the harem. This is not a place of freedom. It is a place of control dressed in beauty, and the eunuchs are its most faithful architects. Religion hums through the harem like a background instrument, steady, constant, impossible to ignore. The call to prayer drifts faintly across the palace courtyards 5 times a day, punctuating the rhythm of your confinement. You kneel on carpets woven with geometric patterns, face the direction of Mecca, and repeat words that millions beyond the walls also recite. Yet while the world outside moves freely after prayer, you remain here, where devotion is as confined as your body. Faith is universal, but within the harem it is also curated and supervised. Islam shaped much of daily life in the Persian empires. By the Safavid era, Shia Islam was the official creed, promoted with zeal as a marker of dynastic identity. This meant rituals, commemorations, and ceremonies flowed into the harem as much as they did into mosques and public squares. You were expected not only to pray, but to embody piety in the polished way the palace demanded. Attendants and eunuchs ensured that prayer times were observed, prayer carpets laid out, and incense burned as an added layer of sanctity. Faith here was both obligation and display. Superstition wove itself around faith like ivy around stone. Amulets inscribed with Quranic verses were tied around wrists and necks, believed to guard against infertility, illness, or misfortune. Some women tucked them beneath pillows, others wore them in braids. Herbs were burned not only for fragrance but to chase away jinn, the unseen beings believed capable of mischief or possession. You might sip rose water prayed over by a cleric, or sleep with a slip of paper inked with verses, folded into cloth and pinned above your bed. Religion and superstition blurred until you could not separate where one ended and the other began. Astrology, despite religious reservations, persisted in practice. Court astrologers were consulted on auspicious times for childbirth, for medicine, even for when a concubine might be presented to the ruler. The stars were believed to influence not only harvests and politics, but wombs and health. You might be told that tonight was favourable for conception, or that tomorrow's alignment was dangerous. Imagine your life dictated not only by eunuchs and physicians, but also by constellations shining unseen above walls you could not cross. Festivals brought bursts of ritual that made the palace shimmer. During Nowruz, the Persian New Year, the harem filled with ceremonial foods, lanterns and prayers for prosperity. The Haft-Seen table, with its 7 symbolic items beginning with the letter S in Persian, was prepared with precision. Sabze, sprouted greens for rebirth. Seer, garlic for health. Sirke, vinegar for patience. Samanu, sweet pudding for fertility. Every item was both food and prayer. You knelt before it, surrounded by other women, aware that even celebration was choreographed. You were not simply welcoming spring. You were performing piety under watchful eyes. Other ceremonies carried more weight. Shia mourning rituals for Ashura, commemorating the martyrdom of Imam Hussein, echoed through the harem with weeping laments, and sometimes even self-flagellation among the devout outside. Inside, women dressed in darker colours recited elegies and mourned with a solemnity that reminded everyone that suffering was not only personal, but cosmic. The paradox was sharp. You mourned within halls gilded with gold, lamenting injustice while living in a structure built on hierarchy and control. Rituals of purification touched daily life too. Water was central to both cleanliness and faith. Ablutions were required before prayer, and attendants ensured that basins were filled, hands and faces rinsed, carpets kept pure. This emphasis on water was not unique to the palace, but amplified by it. Outside, villagers might wash in rivers or wells when possible. Inside, water was always available, channeled through aqueducts and fountains, a sign of wealth and divine favour. To cleanse yourself daily in rose-scented water was a privilege, yet it was also a duty. The body was polished not only for beauty but for prayer. Superstitions about dreams circulated constantly. A pleasant dream could be interpreted as a sign of divine favour. A troubling dream might spark fear of illness, betrayal, or disaster. Women exchanged interpretations, often pulling from centuries-old manuals of dream symbolism. Dream of water, and it might mean fertility. Dream of fire, and it might mean conflict. Eunuchs dismissed such talk as idle, yet even they knew that in a place where control suffocated the present, the future was sought in signs and symbols. For many concubines, faith provided real comfort. The Quran was recited in melodious tones, filling chambers with sound that felt timeless. The rhythm of prayer carved order into otherwise monotonous days. Rituals gave meaning to routines that might otherwise dissolve into emptiness. When your world is reduced to repetition, devotion becomes a way to mark time, to measure days not in meals or perfumes but in moments of piety. Yet faith could also become another layer of pressure. To skip prayers, to seem irreverent, to be accused of neglecting devotion, all could harm your reputation. Piety was another performance, another expectation layered atop beauty, etiquette, and obedience. Even God felt filtered through palace rules. You were judged not only by divine standards but by human interpretations of them, and failure could weigh as heavily as sin. Historical accounts show that harem women sometimes sponsored religious endowments, donating wealth to mosques or commissioning Quranic manuscripts. This suggests that their piety was not only personal but public. By aligning themselves with religious projects, they reinforced both faith and influence. It was one of the few ways they could leave a mark beyond the walls, their names carried on inscriptions long after their bodies were forgotten. At night the rituals continued. Lamps were lit, prayers recited, amulets clutched beneath pillows. The corridors filled with the murmur of faith, as steady as the fountains in the courtyards. You lay down on your embroidered bed, the scent of incense still curling in the air, and wonder whether devotion here is comfort or another form of confinement. Faith promises paradise, but the palace already claims to be paradise on earth. Which one should you trust? The paradox lingers. Religion gives meaning to monotony, comfort to confinement, hope to lives defined by waiting. Yet it also binds you more tightly to rules and expectations you never chose. In the harem, even faith carries the weight of luxury and prison at once. If silence is one language of the harem, gossip is the other. It flows through the tiled corridors like incense smoke, curling into corners, seeping under doors, clinging to every conversation. In a world where freedom is locked away, information becomes the only currency that matters. You learn quickly that the most powerful weapon in this palace is not jewels or perfumes or even the favour of the ruler. It is words, whispered at the right moment to the right ears. The harem magnifies rumour until it becomes reality. A single raised eyebrow during a feast might spark speculation about who has risen in favour. A sudden absence at morning prayer might launch theories of punishment or illness. Eunuchs may be the official watchers, but concubines are the unofficial chroniclers, and their tongues are relentless. Each whisper carries with it the possibility of changing rank, of reshaping perception, of nudging someone higher or lower on the fragile ladder of survival. Psychological warfare thrives in this environment. You're not free to wield swords or lead armies, but you can weaponize glances and words. A rumour about another woman's health might damage her standing, especially in a world obsessed with fertility. Suggest that she is barren, and suddenly her silks shine less brightly. Hint that she is too ambitious, and suspicion grows around her. You do not need to prove anything. In a palace built on secrecy, even shadows look convincing. This was not unique to Persia. Harems across empires from Istanbul to Delhi functioned on gossip as much as on ritual. But Persian culture, with its love of poetry and subtlety, elevated it to a near art form. Insults could be cloaked in compliments, rivalries hidden beneath polite exchanges. A line of verse recited at the wrong moment could sting sharper than an open slap. Words here were not casual. They were instruments. Historical accounts hint at the chaos rumour could cause. In the Safavid era, succession disputes were sometimes inflamed by whispers spread inside the harem. A concubine might promote her son's claim by sowing doubt about a rival's legitimacy. Eunuchs became entangled, carrying rumours beyond the walls to courtiers and officials. What began as idle talk among women could ripple outward to destabilise entire dynasties. The harem was not only a domestic space, it was a political echo chamber, and gossip was its soundtrack. The irony is that gossip thrived precisely because of confinement. Locked away from the outside world, the women turned inward, scrutinising one another with microscopic intensity. Every gesture became a clue, every word a potential signal. Without markets, travel, or politics to discuss, the politics of the harem itself became the only field of battle. It was less about fact than about interpretation, and interpretation was endless. The psychological toll of this constant scrutiny was immense. You lived knowing that every slip of the tongue, every misstep in etiquette, could be magnified into scandal. Trust was fragile. Friendships carried the risk of betrayal, alliances the risk of collapse. Even silence could be dangerous, interpreted as arrogance or disapproval. Imagine living in a place where even your lack of words becomes a subject of discussion. You do not simply exist, you're analysed at all times. For entertainment, gossip doubled as theatre. Women repeated stories with flair, embellishing details, turning suspicion into narrative. The harem produced its own dramas, daily episodes of speculation and intrigue. The performers were not actors but ordinary women, and the audience was everyone within earshot. It passed the time, filled the monotony, and gave life an edge of danger. Luxury numbed the body, but gossip kept the mind sharp. Foreign visitors, when they wrote about harems, often imagined scenes of jealous women clawing at each other in violent fits. That was fantasy. The reality was quieter, sharper, and far more effective. Rarely was a rival openly attacked. Instead, she was slowly undermined, her reputation chipped away until it collapsed. By the time her silks were taken away or her meals diminished, the damage had already been done. Whispered words had done the work of swords. The eunuchs, of course, listened. They knew better than anyone the value of rumour. Sometimes they fueled it, planting hints to test reactions. Other times they suppressed it, reporting dangerous whispers to higher authorities. To survive, you had to learn to manage gossip as carefully as you managed your perfumes and silks. Say too much, and you risked exposure. Say too little, and you risked invisibility. The balance was delicate, exhausting, and constant. Persian poetry itself reflected this culture of layered meaning. Verses often carried double or triple interpretations, speaking of love while hinting at politics, describing gardens while hinting at power. The women of the harem absorbed this style, couching insults in flattery, hiding warnings in compliments. To an outsider, the words might sound harmless. To those within the walls, they were weapons sharp enough to wound reputations permanently. The paradox repeats. Gossip gave you power in a place designed to strip you of it. With words alone, you could shift the balance of favour, tilt the scale of hierarchy, even alter the course of dynastic politics. Yet gossip also enslaved you, binding you to a cycle of constant suspicion, forcing you to measure every syllable, every laugh, every sigh. You were both wielder and victim of this endless war of whispers. At night, as you lie on your bed, the echoes of the day's gossip linger louder than the music. You replay conversations, wonder who twisted your words, who carried them elsewhere, who might be plotting your downfall even now. The oil lamps flicker, casting long shadows, and in the silence you realize that the greatest danger here is not what you can see. It is what you cannot. Rumour is the invisible cage within the gilded prison. Silk rustles louder than words in the harem. Before anyone speaks, before anyone eats, before anyone is even noticed, her clothing has already spoken for her. Fashion here is not simply a matter of beauty. It is a language, a code, a hierarchy stitched into fabric. Every thread, every gem, every colour announces your place in the invisible ladder of favour. To live in the harem is to live inside a runway of politics, where what you wear can matter as much as what you say. Persia was famous for its textiles. For centuries, Persian silks were exported across the Silk Road, coveted from China to Venice. Safavid Isfahan became a hub of weaving, its looms producing brocades, velvets, and embroideries so elaborate they dazzled foreign visitors. Embassies sent back samples as treasures, describing the fabrics as liquid light woven into cloth. For you, these luxuries are not rare gifts. They are your daily uniform, but you do not choose them. They are chosen for you, assigned according to rank, favour, and ritual. Colours are coded. The most vibrant shades are reserved for women of higher status. Crimson silks, deep indigos, and shimmering golds mark those closest to the ruler. Others wear softer hues, creams, pale blues, gentle greens. A woman who dared to wear a shade above her station risked immediate suspicion, sometimes even punishment. Imagine living in a place where even your colour palette is policed. where the wrong shade of red could spark gossip sharper than an insult. Jewellery functions the same way. Pearls, emeralds and rubies announce favour more loudly than words. Heavy necklaces drape across embroidered gowns. Gold bangles jingle with every movement. Jewelled hairpins sparkle under lamplight. These are not personal adornments. They are trophies distributed to mark hierarchy. A necklace is not a gift of love. It is a receipt of status. Lose favour and the jewels vanish, stripped as quickly as they were bestowed. One day you gleam like the treasury itself. The next you find yourself with only a simple bracelet, your status announced to all by what is missing. The fabrics themselves are overwhelming. Brocades woven with gold thread, velvets so thick they hold shape like armour, silks dyed with saffron or indigo. Even cotton imported from India arrives in the palace, softer than what villagers outside could ever touch. To the world, these textiles are treasures. To you, they are daily attire. You might wear a robe worth more than a farmer's lifetime of wages, yet you cannot step outside the courtyard to show it. Luxury collapses into irony when it becomes routine. Fashion is also obligation. You cannot wake one morning and decide that comfort matters more than splendour. Attendants dress you layer by layer, adjusting the folds, arranging the veils, fastening the jewellery. Each step is another reminder that your body is not entirely your own. You're dressed like a living jewel box, an ornament of the empire curated by others. Refusal is not an option. To appear without proper attire would be seen as disrespect, perhaps even rebellion. Historical records emphasize the wealth of Persian dress. Miniature paintings from the Safavid period depict women in gowns embroidered with gold and silver, veils sheer but adorned with patterns, jewels glittering at wrists and ankles. European travellers wrote in awe of the richness, describing women whose clothing sparkled as though made of stars. Yet they also noted the weight of it. These garments were heavy, stiff, and impractical. Imagine trying to move gracefully while wearing 10 pounds of velvet and gold. Fashion here is not designed for comfort. It is designed for spectacle. Veils complicate the picture. Outside the palace, Persian women often wore veils in public, though the practice varied by region and period. Inside the harem, veils served less as modesty and more as performance. Sheer fabrics embroidered with flowers might cover the face slightly, more ornament than concealment. They reminded you and everyone else that even intimacy here was curated. Layers hid you while drawing attention at the same time. Veiled but revealed, covered yet displayed. Another paradox stitched into daily life. Shoes, though less discussed, mattered too. Embroidered slippers of silk or leather, sometimes tipped with jewels, completed the ensemble. A concubine's shoes rarely touched dust. She moved across carpets so thick they swallowed footsteps, across marble floors polished daily. Yet even her slippers carried meaning. A simpler pair meant lower rank. A jewel-studded pair signalled favour. Imagine being judged not only by your smile or your speech, but by the tips of your toes. The economic weight of these fashions was staggering. The palace consumed enormous amounts of textiles and jewels. Workshops in Isfahan, Kashan and Yazd thrived on palace demand. Merchants crossed deserts and mountains to deliver bolts of silk, crates of gems, dyes ground from insects and minerals. While villagers patched wool garments to survive winters, the harem rotated wardrobes with the seasons. Wealth poured into your closet, but you never controlled it. You were the mannequin, not the shopper. Clothing also reinforced surveillance. To appear suddenly in brighter fabrics or heavier jewels without clear reason would spark gossip immediately. Who granted her that silk? Who gave her that necklace? What did she do to deserve it? Fashion announced changes of fortune long before words did. You learned quickly to read garments like texts, deciphering hierarchies at a glance. The palace did not need to publish news. It displayed it on bodies. The paradox is sharpest at night, when attendants undress you. The jewels are removed, the silks folded away, the veils lifted. Beneath it all, you are just skin and bone, no richer or poorer than anyone else. Yet in the eyes of the palace, your nakedness means nothing. You are valued for the fabrics draped across you, the symbols sewn into your sleeves, the gems pinned into your hair. Without them, you are invisible. With them, you're imprisoned. As you lie on your cushions, the memory of the heavy brocade still pressing into your shoulders, you realise the cruel irony of fashion here. It is both your greatest luxury and your heaviest chain. The silks that shimmer in lamplight also announce your captivity. The jewels that glitter in miniature paintings also weigh down your freedom. In the harem, clothing does not only cover you, it defines you, ranks you, controls you. And no matter how dazzling it is, you cannot remove the fact that you're being worn by the garments as much as you wear them. And so, after silks, perfumes, jewels, rumours, and enough rosewater to drown a horse, you've survived life as a Persian concubine. Or at least you've survived hearing about it. Whether you'd call it luxury or prison depends on how much you enjoy endless perfume headaches, being dressed like a jewel box every morning, and having eunuchs eavesdrop on your gossip like it's state policy. It turns out paradise is not always freedom, and prison is not always ugly. Sometimes it's velvet cushions, saffron rice, and a golden cage that smells like ambergris. If that sounds tempting, remember this. The same silks that made you shine also told the world exactly how trapped you were. If you made it this far without dozing off, you're stronger than most Safavid courtiers, so hit the like button before you drift away, and subscribe if you want more of history's strangest bedtime stories. Because next time, we're going somewhere even worse. Think less perfumed palace, and more medieval sewage system. Sweet dreams.